So change of plans, we are not going to be doing individual videos on Fire Emblem games anymore. Instead, focused on, more specific topics, slightly broader, things that, the Fire Emblem series can, I guess, represent in a sense. But regardless of that, this is just kind of a little intermission video. I did, record the FE8 video, so to speak. I also started recording FE9, but I think it's fruitful to, go about it with this way, whatever way I'm going. But either way, we're still gonna, talk about some stuff in this video, mainly in regards to, release things, stuff like that. So, of course, FE8, Sacred Stone. Sacred Stone started development after Path of Radiance, and, that is, of course, interesting. Obviously, Sacred Stones, I guess it's not treated as, as, overly important as other games, but ultimately it's, the story it tells, it is weird. It is, I guess, personal in some sense, but there's not much for it. Of course, there are the, guide and inspired parts of it. The two main protagonists following two different routes. And obviously, the girl protagonist, Erica, tries to see the more compassionate angle. And of course, Ephraim, akin to Alm, he, seeks strength. He's a warrior, obviously he's gonna, if people threaten him, he's gonna just take them out. And there's not much more, to say about that. But obviously, they have their own dynamics, yada yada. But yeah, there's also the fact that, of course, there's monsters in Sacred Stones like there is in Gaiden, and that is something. But of course, Path of Radiance, came out on the GameCube, first 3D Fire Emblem game. Big deal. Grander story. Obviously, the Lagoos choosing to use them, as a means of describing racism is certainly a bold move. But obviously, these the Tellius games are iconic. But yeah. Either way, of course, orchestrated music, that's also, of course, a big thing. But, of course, it didn't sell well. It came out late in the GameCube's lifespan. Yeah, you get the story. And Radiant Dawn, obviously the direct sequel. Obviously, Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are very intimately tied, unlike some of the other, games on the same continent. But, of course, Radiant Dawn, it came out as an early Wii game with no motion controls, and that is a little bit of an interesting sort of decision, dilemma sort of thing. But yeah, obviously, the game's pretty good. But regardless, the next game is a little bit odder. Obviously, Shadow Dragon being a remake of the first game, obviously it's not odd that they would have remade it, but obviously, the Tellius games didn't sell super well, and maybe, they just wanted to churn out Shadow Dragon just to, I guess, maybe get a quick buck. But ultimately, the contrast between Radiant Dawn and Shadow Dragon is, to say the least, it is quite, it is quite widened. It is quite immense. There's, no need to sugarcoat that. Obviously, the Shadow Dragon, the animations are relatively dull. The art style, it's not terrible, but it, doesn't leave much up to the imagination or anything. And, obviously, the story, it goes without saying, the first Fire Emblem, by far the most, generally basic narrative, but still, this is kind of crazy going from this to this. And, either way, though, of course, at the very least, there was some new dialogue and, general stuff like that, a bit more lore, and a bit more, I guess, unique atmosphere that Shadow Dragon provided. But mainly, it just very much improved upon, the gameplay of FE1, had all the quality of life features, including finally the ability to skip player phases, enemy phases, enemy phases, and of course, it introduced reclassing and all the hard difficulties. So the gameplay, it's actually pretty good, but yeah, it is an odd decision, given the circumstances of that game. But of course, even odder, and FE12 decided, obviously it took the general same engine as Shadow Dragon on the DS, and pretty much copied it. But of course, the elephant in the room is the fact that it was only released in Japan, and that's certainly a decision. Obviously, it wasn't gonna, sell too well in America, but still, I guess the cost of translating it or something, that general effort just wasn't worth it. Either way, New Mystery of the Emblem, it does have some new, of course, guidance chapters. It does have some DLC stuff. It obviously has the BSFE chapters as well, and of course the brand new prologue, along with the brand new avatar of this game, the first playable avatar, Chris, who has their own set of controversy. But either way, this game, it has a very, very unique tone, I guess you could put it, compared to the original Mystery of the Emblem. Perhaps that's why it's called New Mystery of the Emblem, but we'll get to that at another time. But of course, the big thing is that, of course, the previous 4 Fire Emblem games have not sold well, and Nintendo may, of course, axe the series if the next game doesn't sell well. But luckily, the next game sells very well, and compared to expectations, and of course that's Fire Emblem Awakening, a game that introduced a ton of, it brought back a ton of different features from previous games, and also introduced a ton of interesting lore, as well as a boatload of, support conversations and other little conversations, stuff like that, and, oh yeah, paid DLC. I think it's like one of the first Nintendo games to do paid DLC, but mostly, it has a very, very grand, overarching, apocalypse harrowing, type of story, and of course, again, it introduces a lot of lore, mainly the fact that, the events of Awakening happen after all the previous Fire Emblem games, and that is, of course, a thing, but either way, it does set a precedent, of course. Obviously, the art style, the very, typical anime-esque art style, as well as the ability to romance, different characters with your brand new customizable avatar, and, shipping, and, of course, waifu stuff. That is obviously a talking point of this game, but it's, there's nothing really for it, so either way, of course, Fate obviously continues more of that waifu stuff, that anime bullshiz, as you would confer it as. But regardless of that, Fates is obviously more infamous for, you have to buy the full game for $80. Obviously, there's multiple routes. You can buy the original, or an original route for $40, and then the other 2 routes for $20 each as DLC, or you can get the special edition on one physical cartridge. But obviously there's also DLC as well, and all that jazz. But of course, Fates, of course, is more infamous, I guess, for its story, and in general, just the game is very, very divisive on a few different levels. But obviously, the translation, controversies and stuff like that, yada yada yada. Obviously, we'll get to some of that stuff if we want to, but of course, the next game, Fates showed that it did have a lot of ambition, but whether or not it succeeded on that ambition, who's to say? I guess we'll check it out sooner rather than later. But of course, the next game is another remake, Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia, remake of Gaiden. The presentation, the music, everything, the artwork is absolutely amazing for a remake. It's probably one of the best, glow-ups of a game of all time. There's no doubt about that. Of course, there's a new dungeon, some DLC and stuff. Yeah, it just really, honed in, the special parts of Gaiden, and also made a name for itself on its own, so... But yeah, obviously, good game, but nothing much more to say. And of course, Three Houses, of course, is the infamous, most popular Fire Emblem game. Pick a house, who do you side with, all that church stuff, all the differing perspectives on how Fodlan should be run, or, who exactly is doing what in Fodlan, what exactly is best for the continent, and all the other random arguments that you can put out there. And obviously we're not going to be dealing with that right now. Anyways, and of course, Effie Engage. Yeah, Engage, obviously the anniversary game, so to speak. It brings the previous mainline games together, and it is certainly an interesting way to celebrate the series, but I guess more notably, it is in fact, I guess, more so the end of the first arc of Fire Emblem, or at least that's how I like to see it. But see you later. So.